Welcome to the Life Fellowship Ministries International broadcast. Our mission is to develop, maintain, and model personal intimacy with Jesus Christ. And now, join us for the Life Fellowship experience.
We're in this series, Promises, Problems, Purposes, and we're talking about the story of Joseph, and we're looking at the application of what he went through and how we can apply that to our lives and how we can maybe navigate through the promises. And many times with that will come some problems and challenges because God is building our character and preparing us for more. And then we get to the purpose. But the previous 2 weeks, I've been laying this background on the life of Joseph and kind of his history, his relatives before him. But as we look down and drill down into the life and the family dynamics of what was going on in Joseph's life, it has a tremendous impact. And I think we can look back and we can understand in our life the way we were brought up, the family we were brought up in. Many people unfortunately experience divorce in their family with their parents or whatever. All those dynamics play into our life and can influence our destiny. God's promises and destiny may be far beyond your dreams. I never dreamed that the Lord would call us to start a church, and sometimes we have a dream or we see what we believe God's destiny for our lives, but we don't know necessarily the journey and the trajectory that we're going to go through to get to that place. And the journey to your destiny may be very different than what you envisioned. I never envisioned that we would live in the Houston area. In fact, when we would drive up here many times with our hotshot delivery service, we would say, we never want to live in Houston. And now we say we never want to live in Hawaii, but that probably won't happen. So anyway, the journey to your destiny often looks different than what you had mapped out in your mind. And speaking of the life of I'm going to talk about Jacob for a few minutes, Joseph's dad. He was madly in love with Rachel, not Leah. And he agreed to work for 7 years to marry Rachel. And the things that transpired there had a huge impact on his life, but not only on his life, but his children's lives and on down the line from there. So my first point is God's promises and destiny may be far beyond your dreams. I think that many times if we can dream it, then we can exponentially take that beyond what we can dream, and that may be God's dream for us because he wants to do exceedingly abundantly more than we could ever ask or think. And so we have his mighty power working in our lives. And so sometimes I think that we are too shallow on what God wants to do through our lives. We short sell our dreams and destiny that God has for us. My second point is trying to manipulate God or the situations won't work well for you. Back to Jacob, he asked Laban why he tricked him with Leah instead of Rachel. And you know the story that Jacob worked 7 years thinking he was going to marry Rachel, and he woke up after the wedding and realized that it was Leah that he was with, not Rachel. And so let's go to Genesis chapter 29, verses 26 to 35. And this is Laban's response when Jacob said, why did you trick me? The thing is that Laban kept changing his wages and he kept deceiving him and tricking him. And so Laban says, it's not our custom here to marry off a younger daughter ahead of the firstborn, Laban replied. But wait until the bridal week is over, then we'll give you Rachel too, provided You promised to work another 7 years for me. Imagine that if you were Jacob, you'd be going, what? I've already worked 7 years for Rachel, and now I'm going to have to work, for Rachel, and I got Leah, and now I'm going to have to work another 7 years? Leah was never part of the deal, at least in Jacob's mind. And Jacob, it was evident that he had greater love for Rachel than he did for Leah. If he would have wanted to marry Leah, right, he would have said, I'll do this for Leah. But this left Leah feeling unloved, hurt, insecure, rejected. And as we'll read in a minute, it presented a miserable environment and circumstance for her. Manipulation and deceit is a setup for problems, division, chaos. And especially as Christians, we should not try to manipulate God into what we want. And I think sometimes we may want to try to do that. Lord, I'm just trying to help you. I remember when we were looking for some property and I was having these meetings with the Lord and I would pray and I'd say, Lord, you know, the land on League City Parkway 96 is getting more expensive all the time. And it sure would be nice if we could buy something now. Lord, I'm just trying to help you out. Genesis 29:28. So Jacob agreed to work 7 more years. A week after Jacob had married Leah, Laban gave him Rachel too. And then it says that Laban gave Rachel a servant, Bilhah, to be her maid. And then if we go back and look in verse 24, we see that when Jacob married Leah, he gave her a maid as well. That was kind of common during that time. Verse 30, so Jacob slept with Rachel too, and he loved her much more than Leah. Then he stayed and worked for Laban the additional 7 years. Now, we read through these scriptures, but I wanted to stop and think about this for a few minutes. Do you think Jacob had any resentment? Do you think Jacob ever made any comments to Leah, to Rachel, maybe at his just, his the way he'd been abused and taken advantage of? And I can imagine that maybe there were some discussions from time to time, and maybe Leah said something and Jacob may have said, look, I worked 7 years for Rachel and I got you. Can you envision that maybe in the heat of an argument or disagreement, those kinds of things would come up? And maybe he would have conversations with Rachel saying, your sister's driving me crazy. I really didn't want to marry her. I wanted to marry you. Think of all the things and the attitudes that could have been happening. Verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved. Now, that probably wasn't a surprise to the Lord. But do you think Jacob's rejection and disdain, maybe at some point in time for Leah, would have been evident to other people? Laban manipulated Jacob. Do you think Leah had any part in that? Maybe she was really drawn and attracted to Jacob, and she really wanted to marry him. She was the older daughter. How could this happen that Jacob thinks that he's marrying Leah? And, Yeah, sorry, thank you. All these names, I hope you're staying with me because I'm having a hard time staying with myself. Jacob, thought he was marrying Rachel, and then he wakes up the next day and Leah is there. Maybe he had a little bit too much to drink. I don't really know how that could happen, how you could wake up with someone that different than what you were thinking it was going to be. But how do you think Jacob felt? Probably angry. Maybe feeling like, man, I worked for 7 years and I was scammed. Do you think that this would make Jacob instantly fall madly in love with Leah? There'd probably be a lot of resentment there. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children, but Rachel could not conceive. And in that culture, it was really important to have children, especially sons. Verse 32, so Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, the Lord has noticed my misery, and now my husband will love me. Leah is suffering the consequences of deception and manipulation. Again, my second point is trying to manipulate God or the situations won't work well for you. Especially if we say we're trusting God. Are we really trusting God, or are we going to try to manipulate the situation to get what we want? Genesis 29:33. She soon, speaking of Leah, she soon became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Simeon, for she said, the Lord heard that I was unloved, and he's given me another son. See, that was a big deal. She's delivering sons. Verse 35, once again Leah became pregnant and gave birth to another son. She named him Judah, for she said, now I will praise the Lord. And then she stopped having children. Again, having children was a big deal. Having a firstborn son, that was a big deal. But let's look at Leah's progression in verses 32 through 35. Her first son, Reuben, the Lord has noticed my misery, and now my husband will love me. Her hopes were that having the firstborn son would alleviate or reduce her misery. And she's like, now I'll be loved. It doesn't just say that she was unhappy or she was discontent. It says that she was in misery. And she's thinking, okay, now that I birthed a son, now my husband will finally love me. Let's look at verse 33. The second son, Simeon, the Lord heard that I was unloved and has given me another son. Now I'll be loved. Now that I've had a second son, he'll love me now. Verse 34, the third son, Levi, surely this time my husband will feel affection for me, since I have given him 3 sons. You notice the change here. She's saying with Reuben, now my husband will love me. The second son, now my husband will love me. The third son, what does she say? It's a shift. Now maybe he'll show me some affection. It's hard not to kind of feel sorry for Leah, because she's like, will my husband at least show me some affection? Maybe treat me with some respect? Maybe treat me better than just someone to sleep with and give him children? And then she says, for the fourth son, Judah, now I will praise the Lord. And then she stopped having children. And I think she finally came to a point where, look, I'm not going to get any love from my husband, so I'll just praise the Lord. Thinking that having a baby will cause Jacob to love her now. Deceiving herself. Has a child ever caused a man to love a woman? I don't think so either. But still, some women try to trap a man with sex or children. Most men will not buy the cow if they're getting free milk. And so to try to manipulate a situation like that and try to trap a man is probably not going to work. And so we read on, and I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to kind of summarize. In chapter 30, Rachel pleaded with Jacob, give me children or I'll die. That's how important it was. And Jacob became furious, and he said, am I God? Am I God? You're coming to me saying, give me children or I'll die? He is the one that's kept you from having children. And then, so Rachel, again, another manipulative tactic. She says, okay, then take Bilhah to be your wife, my servant. Take her and sleep with her. And she'll bear children for me, and through her I can have a family too. Because in this culture, when they would sleep with the maid or the servant, and they had a child, it would become the wife's children too, even though the servant was like a secondary mom, like a mistress, I guess, to some degree. And so Rachel's saying, well, if Bilhah has children, then at least I'll have some children. And so Bilhah has 2 sons. And even I didn't really put this in here, but even after that, Rachel's like, I'm winning, I'm beating Leah. And it seemed to be this competition, like how many children can I get through this birth canal, and the more I have, the more I win. And if you think about it, she only had 2 sons, and Leah had 4 already. So she wasn't really winning. But can you try to understand the mentality of these women and what was going on here? They needed to be so loved. They needed to have this affection, and they needed to have the security of their husband. So Leah stopped having children, and she saw that Rachel had given Jacob her servant. So she's like, oh, I can play this game too. So she goes to Jacob and says, here, take Zilpah, my servant. And so Zilpah had 2 sons. And so there's this whole competitive thing going on. Why am I talking about this? Because do you think it had any influence or any impact in Joseph's life and his relationship with his brothers? Later on, Reuben, Leah's oldest son, found some mandrakes. Those were believed to be aphrodisiacs. And so Rachel begged Leah for some of the mandrakes. And listen to what Leah says to Rachel. She says, wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now you want to steal my son's mandrakes too? So there's this perception that may not be reality, and there's all this conflict that has been building over time. And listen to Rachel's response. I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of the mandrakes. So Leah tells Jacob, you must come and sleep with me tonight. I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found. What kind of healthy relationship, what kind of healthy family dynamics do we have going on here? You must sleep with me. Well, why should I? Because Rachel said you need to. So we see this whole thing for control. And so guess what happens? Leah gets pregnant again. And eventually she has 2 more sons. So I was thinking about all these dynamics. I was thinking, how do you think Leah felt about her own servant, Zilpah, that was having Jacob's children? Okay, they belong technically to Leah, but do you think that Leah may have had a little different level of love and honor for the children that came through her birth canal as opposed to her servant's womb? What kind of dynamics would be taking place there? And what about Leah having regard for Bilhah's children, Rachel's servants? How do you think she felt about that? Oh, good, I'm so happy. And how do you think Rachel felt with her own servant? She couldn't have a child, but yet her maid is able to have children. How do you think she felt about those children? How do you think Rachel felt about Leah's servant, Zilpah? So you would think that maybe they would have learned some things, because if you go back to Jacob's grandfather, remember Abraham and Sarah? Sarah couldn't get pregnant, and what did Sarah say? Well, go sleep with my maid, Hagar. And we know the mess and all the stuff that came from that's still present today as a result of some of those things. And so you would have thought that maybe they could have realize something there? But Leah's ability to have children left Rachel feeling less than Leah. So this only fed any kind of insecurity that she would have had. And do you think that jealousy and competition bled over to Leah's servant, Zilpah, and Rachel's servant, Bilhah? Do you think Bilhah and Zilpah could have been jealous, feeling second to Leah and Rachel? Do you think there would be intense competition, conflict, and rejection that would trickle down from the moms to the children? Let's go to Genesis chapter 37. So Jacob settled in the land of Canaan where his father had lived as a foreigner. Joseph's dreams were a vital part of the destiny that God had given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, rather. My third point this morning is don't expect everyone to applaud and embrace the destiny God has for you. This is the account of Jacob and his family. Verse 2 continues, when Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Now, being a shepherd was potentially dangerous anyway because you had wild animals, lions and tigers and bears. But there were other influences too. Conflict, competition with the brothers. Do you think that there was some competition there, just naturally? I mean, how many of you have siblings? Was there ever any sibling rivalry? Well, Dad loves you better. Well, Dad loves me best. Look what he bought me. You know, it can happen. It does happen. But there was probably a lot of hatred from this culture of conflict that these boys had grown up in. Verse 2 continues, but Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Oh, great. Here comes the tattletale. I'm sure his brothers didn't appreciate that very much. And again, he's probably working for all of his brothers. He's probably serving them on some level. But it specifically states that he's working for Bilhah and Zilpah's sons. And you know that they were probably not very kind and gracious to him because of that. Then let's read on. This doesn't help Joseph either. Jacob loved Joseph. This doesn't help Joseph any better. Is that what I said? Joseph, Jacob, you know, all these names. Okay. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. But I think in addition to that, because Joseph had come from the wife that Jacob really loved, Rachel. Although Joseph was not Rachel's firstborn son, or well, it was her firstborn son, but you know, Bilhah had sons too. But Jacob loved Rachel with all of his heart. And so I think when she had Joseph, that was a special thing for him. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. And I can imagine that Joseph would go, hey bros, look at this. Look what Dad gave me. Isn't this beautiful? Maybe he'll make you one. Maybe he'll get one for you. And I'm sure the brothers have been like, oh, that's so cool, Joe. We're so happy for you, not? I'd like to strangle your little scrawny neck. So, you have all these dynamics going on. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. It was more than just a robe. They couldn't say a kind word to him. And so this attitude probably that was filtering down to these boys. What do you think the attitude from Leah and Zilpah was regarding Joseph? Little rascal. What do you think the attitude from Rachel would have been? That's my son. Look at him. Look at that robe he has on. Look how wonderful he is. So, there's all these different dynamics going on, and I'm taking time to get us to think about these things because these things all play into the destiny of Joseph. And maybe you can look back in your own life and you can see that there's some woundedness from some rejection or what you perceive that mom or dad loved your sibling more than you or whatever. These things have an impact in our lives, and they can cause great depths of woundedness in our hearts that can be a hindrance for God's destiny in our life. Let's read on. It gets better. One night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, Joseph said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. Do you think maybe Joseph could have used a little more discernment? I mean, they love him so much already. And his brothers responded, so you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. It wasn't really Joseph's fault that God was giving him these dreams and showing him his destiny. But maybe he could have used a little more discernment, and maybe he was braggadocious. I mean, we don't know. But it would seem that the Lord was giving Joseph dreams, because it says they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. So, a couple of things here. When God gives us a dream, when God gives us a destiny, it's okay to receive that. And we should be excited about it because it's something that the Lord has given us. But maybe we need to be sensitive to other people without compromising our belief and faith in what God has told us. But soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. I can imagine that maybe they're sitting around the campfire roasting marshmallows, making s'mores. And Reuben says, hey, Simeon, would you hand me some more of the Hershey's chocolate for my marshmallow? And so anyway, they're sitting around, in my mind, in my story, and they're making s'mores. And Joseph says, listen, I had another dream, he said. They're like, oh, good, we can't wait to hear it. We're so excited for you. Now, I don't know that they said that, but he said, in my dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time, he told the dream to his father as well as his brothers, but his father scolded him. You think his father knew that there were some things going on? He's like, be quiet. They're about to kill you anyway. They want to kill you. They don't like you. They hate you. And so his father says, what kind of dream is that? He asked. When God gives us a dream or a destiny or a prophetic word, not everyone will always understand, because the Lord is speaking something to you, and maybe it's not for them. But Jacob goes on to say, will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? Is that what you're saying, Joseph? Really? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. And I think that as a father, he probably saw the hand of God on his son, Joseph. And he probably thought about some of these dreams and some of these things in his heart, because the Lord was probably speaking to him. And maybe the brothers considered that there might be something actually to this. Maybe they saw the favor of God on Joseph's life. And maybe that's why they hated him so much. And if not, why would they be so jealous? And I think Jacob may have been hearing something from the Lord. So we need to take time to listen to the Holy Spirit. We need to take time to prepare our hearts to receive what he has for us, what his destiny is for you, because it's not just going to work, doing the same old thing. God has a purpose and plan for you, and part of that destiny is where you work. Part of that destiny is that you are a light, and you get to share the hope and the love of Christ with people you work with that may not know him. I remember one of the last secular job I had, the Lord told me I was going to be leaving that. And I remember one day driving to meet my wife for lunch, and I was thinking about what the Lord had told me. And I was thinking about those guys that I worked with. I was over all the corporate per diem, so I dealt with most of the thousands of employees, many of them. I had a personal connection with. Whenever they would have a problem, I would take care of it. And I began to weep. I was crying so hard that I could barely drive because I realized that when that happened, I would never see most of those guys ever again. And although there were some that I prayed with and got to share Jesus with, in reality, I knew that some of those people would never receive Christ. And my opportunity to share the hope and the love of Christ with them would be no more. I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I was so burdened, and I met my wife, and she's like, "Are you okay? You look like you've been crying." I'm like, "Yeah, I've been crying a little bit. I almost wrecked. I was crying so hard I couldn't see." And you know what happened? I got back from lunch, and I reported to the chief financial officer. He called me in his office, and he said, "Hey, Mark, I want you to take a 41% cut in pay." And I said, "No, Ted, I can't do that. No way." And that was the end. That was the end. I came back on Monday. They got all my paperwork together, and I left. And you know, kind of a sidebar for that is when I went home on that happened on a Friday. When I went home on Saturday, I prayed and I said, "Lord, I don't want to go back. I want to get my insurance paid till the end of the year, and I'd like my salary paid to the end of the year." And so I went back on Monday and I talked to the owner of the company. He didn't know any of that. And he said, "I want to pay your insurance to the end of the year. I want to pay for your salary to the end of the year." The things that I asked for, I got. And then on top of that, he said, "On top of that, I want to give you a bonus." And when I walked out that day, that afternoon, that Monday afternoon, my boss was in front of me, and I said, "Hey, Ted, I want to thank you for this opportunity." I said, "But I want to know honestly, is there anything I didn't do that I should have done, or is there anything I should have done that I didn't do?" And he said, "No, Mark." He said, "You excelled at everything you did." And then he kind of stopped, and I realized at that point in time, this was not being driven by my boss or even by the owner of the company. This was a God-determined thing. This was part of my destiny, that I had fulfilled my role there, and now God was moving me on. And that was an important part of the preparation for where I am today. So, you know, we're going to be talking about the life of Joseph, and just realize that God has a purpose and a plan and a destiny for you. And it may not look like what you think it's going to look like. And the trip there may be different than what you have mapped out in your mind. But the key is to stay the course. God's promises and destiny may be far beyond your dreams. You may be thinking your dream is here, your destiny is here. You say, no, it's way up here. But you've got to let me get you there. You've got to allow me to build the character in your life to sustain where I want to take you. Trying to manipulate God or the situations won't work well for you. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how I'd prayed over this resume. I anointed it with oil, and I said, "I want this job, God. I claim this job." I got that job, and I was like, "God, get me out of this place." So we can try to manipulate God, or we can yield to him. My third point, don't expect anyone to applaud and embrace the destiny God has for you. Sometimes people are going to be jealous. Sometimes your destiny is not going to be understood. I remember when God called us to start the church, I talked to this old friend of mine who's very, very wealthy, and he said, "You picked a bad time to start a church." I said, "Well, it wasn't our timing. And to God be the glory." because he'll work everything out. But even our own family and loved ones, they can be jealous. They can be resentful. And when you have the blessings of God, never apologize for God's blessings in your life. Yes. Determined to stay in your lane and run your race. It's God's destiny for you. And we have a choice. We can run with God. We can fulfill the destiny He has for us. Or we can get off track and try to fulfill our own destiny.